Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's having a great week, and hopefully you'll enjoy the weekend and the great weather we've been having lately. I did want to make one announcement before we get started on our podcast. I've decided to go back to our once-a-week format that we had started off our podcast with. So effective next week, our podcast will just be aired on Fridays. You can see our library of podcasts. I think we're on podcast 80-something, so we've got a lot of podcasts on our various sites that you can hear if you want to go back and listen to older podcasts. The reason I've decided to go back to one podcast a week is really for selfish reasons. I've been pretty busy lately real estate-wise and with the holiday season and all. Excuse me. And it's just been challenging putting together podcasts twice a week and incorporating them into my schedule. So for my own reasons, we're going to go back to the once a week starting this coming week. Hopefully that won't inconvenience anybody too much. Still fighting this cold, as you can hear. I get periodic cough and jags from when I had the flu or COVID about a month ago. But fortunately, that's the only byproduct I have currently. Let me start off with a little bit of statistical updates for you. I thought everybody would be interested in our mortgage comparisons. A year ago, mortgages across the country were averaging about 6.79. And as of this week, they're down nationally to 6.22. So they've gone down about 0.5% overall. Now, that figure does go up and down a little bit depending on how our different economic yard marks get affected by announcements of the Federal Reserve and such. So one day they might pop up a little bit, the next day they'll go back down. But basically they've gone down about 0.5% in the last year, which is a good sign. It's not earth-shattering, but it's always better to be lower rather than higher. I still think that by the end of the spring in 2026, which is that'll be about 4 or 5 months from now, I'm hoping that we get below that 6% framework. But we'll just have to see. I know the Fed's still concerned with inflation, and so we'll see about that. You know, it's interesting. We just had some initial elections this past Tuesday. They weren't on midterms, but they were special elections or elections that had slightly different dates. They had a few governor elections. They had the mayor election in New York and a few other things. And basically, the biggest issue that was cited in those campaigns was the affordability index. And basically, what that meant is that it's increasingly more challenging to afford to live right now. Housing prices have not gone down. When you combine that with interest rates being higher than they were 5 years ago, that's affected a lot of people. But I think more importantly, what's impacting people right now is your day-to-day durable goods. When you buy groceries, et cetera, at the grocery store, when you go out to eat, it's gotten noticeably more expensive. And as I mentioned in Tuesday's podcast, our current administration with Donald Trump, he basically ran on 2 items to the extent of everything else. One, he was going to address immigration and kind of make it a lot harder for people to be in the country illegally, and he was going to start aggressive deportation. So I think he has done that. You can argue or not agree on the methods that he's done and splitting up families. And there's a lot of things that go on with that. It's not a simple problem, but he has cut down the numbers. I don't think there's anybody that can dispute that in raw numbers. The other thing is the economics or the cost of living. And so far, he has failed with that. Prices are at record levels in some of these sectors. People are worried about inflation. Even when the general inflation rate in some other sectors has leveled off, most people's confidence in their economic future and the cost of living right now is a lot more negative. And I think the majority of people, regardless of their political affiliation, are highly disappointed with what he hasn't done in terms of pricing. I think what's also hurt him a lot in terms of how people's perception is optics and some of the policies that he's implemented. What I mean by optics are, it's estimated they're going to spend about $300 million to make updates to the White House. And they've pretty much demolished a lot of the East Wing. And the big updates that they publicize are having a 300-seat ballroom, et cetera, putting a lot of gold in the White House, et cetera. And I think the optics of that were not very well thought out by the president, because here there's a lot of people worried about how they support their family and the cost of goods, yet he's doing something what's seemingly very opulent, and you could argue how necessary it is. And the average American is never going to take part or see any of those optics. So it's an abstract concept to them, and it's not really going to impact anyone. And it's basically done from what's been publicized and discussed, one reason. And the reason is that Donald Trump wants it. He wants to leave, in his mind, a legacy. So one of his legacies is, when historians talk about 2021 to 2024, they can say that Donald Trump caused more cosmetic and construction changes in the White House of possibly any president in the 250 years that the United States has been in existence. So for him, he always likes to say biggest and best. I think he utilizes those two adjectives more than any two words in his vocabulary. So, but the optics, I think, have really been very negative, and I think they impacted these elections a lot, because basically the moderates or the Democrats in the elections that we did have Tuesday pretty much won overwhelmingly. The two things that got a lot of publicity in terms of particular races were, in California, they had a amendment to do what's called gerrymandering, which basically is redistricting congressional areas for the upcoming midterm elections. And that passed overwhelmingly. Over 63% of the voters in California voted for that. So when they call the term gerrymandering or changing the grids for these congressional seats, basically it's a legal form of manipulation. And basically what it does is, depending on what areas they do this with, it can create more seats for Democrats, or it can create more seats with Republicans. And what's gotten this so much more publicity is, earlier this year, Donald Trump and his followers aggressively did this in a number of Republican states. So now they're going to have more elected officials ostensibly in Texas and a couple other Republicanly directed states. Gerrymandering, to some degree, has gone on in this country for a lot of years. In my opinion, it's a terrible, terrible concept. You probably, if you remember when you took history or civics back when you were in middle school, they discuss gerrymandering, so it's not like it's a new concept. It's gotten more publicity now, and it's probably even more done because we're in such a negative political and adversarial climate. But it's a terrible concept. There shouldn't be a method that they can manipulate how they're going to create more seats, whether it's for Republicans or Democrats. There ought to be an amendment to the Constitution to make that illegal. For whatever reason, I guess because the politics of the thing, neither party wants to admit it's a terrible thing, and they like to manipulate. It's another form of power wielding for these different parties, but it's terrible, and it ought to be immediately eliminated. And this should be on a bipartisan method so that there's no favoring one party over the other. But unfortunately, at this point, no one has brought that up as an approach to do. And so when you look at the optics of that, and then you look at all the other things, these things so far have backfired on the more extreme elements of our politics, which in our case, what's happened is a lot of the more conservative elements in these few elections that we had earlier in the week lost out. And basically, when we have an extreme candidate, then they tend to get more publicity, and it tends to divide the country even more. A couple incidents that took place this past week was the election in New York, where the Democratic candidate won overwhelmingly, I believe with around 60% of the vote for mayor in New York City. And he runs as basically what's called a democratic socialist. So obviously, when you hear the term socialist, a lot of images form, and most times in our country, socialism has a very negative connotation. And so what's happened now is once this person is in office starting in January, the Republicans are going to try to use him as an example of the Democrats being socialists, where this is only one party. I mean, one person, rather. And you can make the same case for extreme right-wing conservatives, how you can categorize the entire Republican Party as being extremist on the right side. So it's very dangerous to categorize people. But why the Democratic Socialist won so handily was really on one issue, affordability. It's impossible for the average person to live in New York City now. It's just gotten way out of hand with the cost. If you're like a middle-class individual, it's hard to buy real estate in New York. If you're a young professional person that's just getting started, it's almost impossible to rent an apartment. So you either have to get multiple roommates or you have to have an obscenely long commute. And trying to commute into the city from a suburb is a time-consuming process. So in either event, none of those alternatives are very good. And people are fed up with it. They feel there's a lack of equity in our country. And this isn't a Republican problem, and it's not a Democratic problem. It's a United States problem, but it seems to be exacerbated during certain parties or persons in power. We've had a much larger, what I would call, separation of classes in the United States for the last 45 years. And what I mean by that is our middle class is eroding, the rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. So there's more adversarial things going on. There's more people that are struggling to raise their families. And normally a democratic society is founded on middle class people, and there's just less middle class people right now. And neither party has addressed this issue. They sometimes will give it lip service, but the policies are not trying to bridge this gap at all. And what's really come to the forefront this year in 2025, and what's causing even more distress and adversarial policies, is what they refer to as the big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump passed. It's a heavily layered bill, but to try to simplify it and generalize it a little bit, you can say two things that are accurate, and if somebody was being truthful, they could not argue these things. Number one, there were significant tax cuts made, especially for the most wealthy people, or what they consider the top 1%. You know, for example, Elon Musk just got awarded a contract with Tesla. He's going to be compensated at over $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion to work for a company. They feel that he's worth it in his technological and business acumen. But nobody needs to make $1 trillion heading a corporation. It's an obscene amount of money. And you're getting more and more billionaires in this country. The gentlemen that own Amazon and some of these other conglomerates are making obscene amounts of money. And again, the people that are less well-to-do are making less and less money, and it's harder and harder for them to afford things, to break into the real estate sector, and to adequately support their families. And there's no reason why the top 1% should have gotten a tax break. I don't care what logic you use. It's a fallacy that if rich people make more money, they're going to give it back to the less affluent people. It just doesn't work that way. It never has. It never will. People that are wealthy, for the most part, want to get more wealthy. They love money, and they love the power that kind of money is associated with. And the trickle-down theory that they used many years ago during Ronald Reagan's presidency, just as a concept that sounds good in theory, but has never worked in practice. So what's happened due to these policies? They've unfortunately caused our government shutdown. So now our government shutdown is in its 38th day. This is the longest government shutdown in the history of the United States. And it's, I believe, the second longest shutdown was during Donald Trump's first administration, when it was 35 days. So for whatever reason, President Trump seems to be a lightning rod to have these government shutdowns. And you can argue, if you feel the Democrats are being too obstinate, whatever the case may be, but these election results basically prove that the average voter is blaming the Republicans for these shutdowns. But the shutdowns are over one item, basically, to have addressed, and that's health care. When this beautiful bill came out, one of the things that they tried to keep quiet, but it didn't stay quiet for long, was how they were going to make health care less affordable. Donald Trump, ever since he's been in office, when he got elected in 2016 and then when he got reelected in 2020, he has a real dislike and hatred for Barack Obama. And anything that Barack Obama accomplished, he's tried to denigrate. And I'm not here to say that every policy that Barack Obama had was good, but I can say that his health care policy was better than what we had prior to that. His health care policy was what he invested a lot of his political capital with his first year in office. And I'm sure from his point of view, he had to expend so much capital on health care that he didn't get other things accomplished that he would have liked to. But basically, just to refresh everybody, before he got in office, there was millions and millions of people that were uninsured in this country, which should never happen in a democratic, civilized society. And people that had pre-existing conditions, pre-existing health conditions, if they didn't work in a big corporate environment where they had group insurance, they couldn't get health insurance. Or if they did get health insurance, it was terrible, it was expensive, and their pre-existing condition wasn't covered. So in either event, it was not a very good scenario for that. Well, Barack Obama, when he instituted what has been coined as Obamacare, it eliminated that. It made the coverages increase, and it forced the insurance companies to offer insurance to everyone regardless of their health. And it was basically skewed so that the premise of it was that if you had enough healthier people that got covered, it would fund the unhealthy people getting covered. And overall, I think it worked pretty well. I don't know what the exact number was, but they had probably 20 to 40 million of people that got insurance that were uninsured previously. And so, in my opinion, that was a tremendous success. And it made health insurance for people that had lower incomes a lot more affordable. They could go on what's called the healthcare portal and get pretty affordable health insurance. And what has happened is when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, one of his main pledges was he was going to eliminate Obamacare. He thought it was terrible, horrible, and he was going to come up with a superior plan. And he railed about this continually. But as if you recall, he never put new health care into effect. And do you know why? It's very simple. He had a lot of what I call salesman's puffing, or he embellished, but he couldn't come up with a better alternative to Obamacare. And he never would admit this, but it was obvious because he never put forward a proposal that could even be voted down. Because healthcare is a very complicated item. And until the healthcare companies in our country are more willing to be more flexible and get a lower profit margin, they were pretty much forced to follow this government mandate, which helped the average person. So we had no changes pretty much of healthcare during Donald Trump's his first administration. When he got back into office now, he again railed on it. So one of the things he did in this big, beautiful bill was he dramatically raised the premiums that are going to go into effect no later than the beginning of 2026 for people that had affordable health care or Obamacare. It's estimated, depending on your age and the state you lived in, and there's a lot of variables, but health care was going to go up anywhere from 25 to 100% for anybody that was enrolled in that. And most of the projections I've heard are going to be closer to the 100% increase, but I have seen the range quoted as low as 25%. So since I don't have access to all this information, I'll give you a range. But I have a couple stories in my family that hit close to home. I have a cancer survivor in my family that, again, previous to Obama, wouldn't have been able to get insurance. I have somebody that developed juvenile diabetes when they were in college that, again, would have had a hard time getting health insurance. And I'm self-employed. So I've been self-employed. Obviously, I'm in the real estate business for years and years, and my wife is self-employed. So even with Obamacare and such, fortunately, we've been pretty successful in real estate. And in order for us to have coverage that we feel is quality coverage, we've always paid an arm and a leg for health insurance, and we still do. And my daughter, who's in the entertainment business, she just left full-time employment in a company where she was receiving health benefits because she wanted to give more time to her entertainment choice of fields. So she just started getting her own health insurance through the Obamacare program. And it's estimated that her health insurance is going to double when January rolls around. So these are real life situations that are going on. This is not a lot of political pontificating. And it's going to have very detrimental effects. And this is why the Democrats pretty much have said we want to discuss health care before, because it's the only leverage that they have right now. You might not agree with them, but most of their supporters felt the Democrats had been too weak and bulldozed by the Republicans and President Trump. And this is kind of where they're drawing their line in the sand. Now, what side effects have we had by having this government shutdown? Well, what they call the SNAP program, which is related to food stamps and different things that people that are struggling financially, those programs were cut off by the government, but the court system has ruled that they're going to have to reinstitute them. So there's a lot of political jockeying going on, how quickly that's going to take place, what percentage of the benefits are going to be given back to the people during this government shutdown. But these people desperately need it, and it was an inhumanitarian thing. When you make dramatic changes, regardless of whether you think they're good or bad, the least you can do is give people adequate notice so they can somewhat be prepared for dramatic change, and this wasn't done. But the court system, and these are a lot of times conservative court people, they've ruled against Trump's plans when it comes to cutting or eliminating those benefits during the government shutdown. What's going to affect the average consumer, regardless of how much income they have, is our airline system. Because of the government shutdown, the air traffic controllers, which are necessary to run our system, they're working without getting paid right now during the shutdown. And a lot of these folks, rightly or wrongly, have called in sick more, are trying to get secondary jobs to support their families. So the air system we don't have enough personnel to fly safely like we should. So effective, I think today, they've cut back on the airline flights, and it'll be about a 10% cutback. And as of today, I read they're going to have 800 flights canceled nationally, but that number's going to increase. And what that's going to do is going to cause delays. It's just going to cause havoc with our airline system. I know myself, I have no intention of flying anywhere until the shutdown is completed and we get back to normal staffing levels. As it is with our air system in the past year or two, we've had a lot more airline situations that are cause for concern. You can argue on the reasons, but we've had more near misses, and we just had that UPS plane crash. We had that big plane crash in D.C. earlier this winter. So our airline system does not seem to be running very smoothly even before this government shutdown. Some other key people that don't get paid during the shutdown are most of our military troops, our federal police. Our campgrounds are either shut down or dramatically reduced, like if you want to go to the national parks, if you want to go to some of the museums that we operate, different things of that nature. So it's causing havoc in our day-to-day life. And unfortunately, it's all about politics. And, you would think we've had this argument for years. Regardless of politics, this stuff should be done in a bipartisan fashion. And humanitarian stuff such as health care should not have to be a bargaining chip. Because with these cutbacks, if the cutbacks go through in health care, there hasn't been any alternative given to people. So it's estimated that 42 million people are going to go without health care. So I point these out because these things all have a relationship with our quality of life. They affect other industries. Fortunately in Florida, we don't have as many federal jobs, but can you imagine if you live in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, where all these government things are taking place, and they've already had a reduction in force from people. A lot of people were forced out by a lot of these policies. It's definitely going to have an impact on those areas in real estate, among other things. I mentioned real estate because that's what I do for a living. So people need to make their opinions heard, and our system is really broken in this country. As you've heard me say on podcasts previously, we need to have an elimination of the Republican Party, the elimination of the Democratic Party. They just are not getting things done. But unfortunately, trying to change our political system is not an easy thing, and it probably won't be done in my lifetime. But people need to demand change, because if you don't demand change, and unfortunately, besides protests, the only other way is to go to the ballot box. And maybe some of these elections that we had on Tuesday will influence some of these extreme policies. So anyway, I know a lot of what I went over today was more societal related, but I thought it was important to go over. It's fresh on my mind, and I think it's important. So that's all for today. Everybody have a safe and healthy weekend. Enjoy our weather. Enjoy your families. And this is Marty Kaiser out.